What was the idea?
I started really just with the top of the score, A, letter A, this idea of the alternation between the 3/4 and the 5/8,
Yeah,
which is the kind of wonky seesaw that runs through all
yeah,
of the segments of the score. And then I wanted to just create some fragments that might be flexibly kind of overlaid or put in sequence, but they all are sort of based around either a hocket between two parts or a kind of dialogue between two groups.
yeah.
Yeah, that's how I started.
Because that 3 4 5 8 is perfectly inégal. That awkward seesaw is also what is kind of inégal. You know, we're always shifting, and inégal means shifted or swung. So it's just the perfect thing for us, and it keeps displacing us. Although we did settle down into a really tight groove with it. Um, and then the glissando, completely opposite from the tight rhythms, work beautifully to bring that in as a punctuation or as an open colour, which we developed. Let's have a listen to the opening of Helen's piece, and you'll also hear me describing the signals that I use. So these performances were unrehearsed, but everyone did know my signals. So this means to loop, this means to solo, this means to stop or go through the stop, this means do what you like. But you'll hear me introduce the signals, and the last one brings in this lovely solo from Alex Hawkins. Here's the opening of Helen's piece. Lovely one-page score from Helen. Just key ideas and a groove that alternates 3 4 and 5 8. That must be a seesaw. I'm always thinking about band leading. I like to have some elements fixed, like the score, working out a realization with the musicians, sometimes free improv, and then in between all of this, signals. For example, loop, solo, hold, head back to the beginning, like this other person, stab and stop, and finally, do what you like. A solo signal set Alex Hawkins off on this splendid solo. This is the signal to change section to number 4. It's seesaw glissando. Alice Zawodzki really hits that groove there on Helen's key rhythm. Helen, you weren't able to join us on the night, although you have played at Club Inégales in the past. What did you think when you heard the recording?
Yeah, well, it was wonderful to see what surprises you're going to come up with. I really loved the variety. Sometimes really locking into kind of meaty grooves, which is great, and then those kind of fragile violin and vocal lines which were drawing on the glissando. So I love the different directions that you took it in. Always a surprise around the corner.
And all unpredictable. In fact, we had a very nice review in the American Composers Forum which said the mordant feel of the second half suggests an evil carnival with a Calliope keyboard patch. So we also had an evil carnival. But I love the fact that these pieces go on journeys. So in the end, we ended up on the C, which is in the score as your first note, but it turned into this beautiful solo from Alex Zawodzki and then Torbjörn Hortmark on the trumpet. So let's hear the end. Wonderful. Torbjörn can go to those wonderful elegiac distant spaces. He's played in the band for 10 years, and every now and then we settle down to just hearing Torbjörn go on those wonderful journeys, all on Helen's Sea. So we had 17 scores, and the idea was they were a one-page score, so the composer had to get all their ideas onto one page. In some cases it was one bar, in some cases, like in Byron's piece that's coming up, it was some fully written sections. But what was wonderful was to have all that variety, and of course it keeps the band fresh. If you've got to go from a graphic score to a text to playing a tight rhythm in 5/4, that also gave a spur to the whole day because we had to stay fresh and keep adjusting. The next piece we're going to look at is Halim's piece, and she used a kind of Korean notation, which you can see on the screen. Halim, can you tell us your idea for this?
I was inspired by Korean traditional notation called 정간보, which is read from right to left, from top to bottom, and there are little squares which represent the beat, and the little symbols inside the box is representing the movement of the note. So I was curious if I use different kind of notation system and introduce this to the musicians who doesn't know anything about this, and how I want to see how they react to them. And normally the original notation system, all the symbols are the same size, but I just vary the size of the symbols because the tone colors in Korean music is actually quite multi-dimensional. So there's some tone going forward and going backward, the tone coming from sideways. We have this kind of various descriptions for the tone colors. So to explain that aspect, I just vary the size of the symbol. So for the sound for the forefront, I just make it bigger, and then the sound for the backward make it smaller. Show some perspective. So I just imagine that this little square is not just a square; it's more like a cube. So yeah, it was very interesting to see all the amazing musicians to interpret in their own way, in very different ways.
Yeah, because in the Korean, you think of each note as discrete, don't you? Each note has its own shape and its own vibrato and its own color. There's a tradition in Korea of playing things note by note.
That's true. So that's why we think that each note has their own journey, ups and downs. That's why this symbol is very effective. It shows how the single individual notes move, how to move, what is the journey goes around. So that it shows the shape of the journey. So this notation is very suitable for Korean aesthetic. Actually, in fact, it turned out that, to me at least, it sounded different because I believe that notation system affect somehow cognitive system of the musician's brain, I guess. So that's what I'm thinking, but who knows?
Yeah, we'll ask them in a moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Korean music. I've loved it for a long, long time, and not least the rhythmic style. So I tried when we did it, because whenever you start these performances, you want something to grab you at the beginning, a feeling or an instinct. So I just sang what I thought was a kind of slow Korean rhythm, and then all these grungy rhythms emerged. So, and with this amazing texture that has a Korean influence, but also lots of electronic sounds. Let's have a listen. wonderful texture. So, Hailin, were you playing a kind of traditional Korean phrases, or were they your own phrases?
I think at least I should be somehow a certain degree stick to some traditional way of playing, because the other peoples are interpreting the symbols different ways. So I sort of project some traditional melodies.
Yeah.
But I can clearly.
Go on. Go on, Hailin.
Hit some kind of a Korean rhythms by conducting, like, because there's some kind of gravity in Korean music, but you understood that, I know.
Yeah, it's a really successful piece. But Yak, what was it like to play in? How did you see those notations?
I remember them, but the whole day was, I flew in and I came in and I just played, and then it was over. So the question you ask is a bit too complicated for me at the moment. Okay. But I remember, and I could see on the video, I tried to interpret them as correctly as I could.
Yeah. It was quite an intense day. Yeah. We'll see if we can remind you of some more of it as we go. So we're gonna go on to Alex Roth's piece. Let's have a look at the score for that. This, you could say, is a classic one-page score, if such a thing exists. Just got these three tiny elements. There's a drone at the bottom, a poem in the middle, and then it just says listen at the end. And amazing, just all we needed. So we could get the drone settled, and then I remember this poem, which is very touching, The Sky Drops a Tear, and which we've partly thought of in memory of John Cumming, which we'll talk about later. But I had this feeling that Kuljik should set the groove, and to get the kind of warmth and compassion into the groove that poem needs. So let's have a listen to that. We can hear how it starts off, and also hear this lovely melody from Christian Forshaw. Lovely, lovely. And Christian Forshaw has who's a member of the resident band, has a real gift for melody, just a 3-note melody that keeps coming around. And Joel there, decorating it with the guitar. Kuljik, the review from the American Composers Forum said Alex's piece was an alluring soundscape grounded in a tabla groove that gives it a Hindustani vibe. I don't know how you like the idea of it being called a Hindustani vibe. It's got a lovely vibe.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded British to me.
West London, I think we are, aren't we?
Exactly that, yeah.
It's quite slow, but it's just something very calm about it, the way you set that. I mean, part of my job is often to see who I put onto bat, when we do these improvisations or create pieces, I look around and think, that person, that violin, that drummer, that pianist, and get a feeling for where they are and where they're tuned into at that time. And I remember specifically thinking you were the one to set that feeling going.
It's interesting because it's how with the tabla and probably a lot of other Indian instruments, the sound of them immediately makes a lot of people think of India, whereas I've been in England all my life, born in Kenya, and for me, it's nice to sometimes, in fact, very often, step into a different musical context where I'm playing an Indian rhythm, but for me, it didn't feel like I was playing anything Indian apart from the drums, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it does. So, Yeah, I wonder what style you. I hate the word style really. So there isn't really a style there. It's you feeling the situation, Joel providing the lines, and it finds its own style. It finds its own voice, which is the best possible thing. And it's no longer a Hindustani vibe or any other kind of vibe, Korean vibe. It's the people in the room at that time, which is the ideal of the club, really. Yeah, lovely. Let's move on to Byron Wallen's piece, who can't be in the club tonight. He's doing a gig in Nottingham with another one of our guests, Rob Luft. Byron is the person who's made the most guest appearances at Club Inégales. So in our 100 gigs at Club Inégales, we always have the same form. The house band, resident band play, and there's sort of 10-ish people who circulate in that band. Then the guest plays, and the guests have been a Maori shaman, Will Self, African kora player, classical saxophone player, and so on. So we've deliberately had every kind of guest at Club Inégales collaborate, playing their own, showing their own work in the second set, and playing with us in the third set. And as it happens, or for very good reasons, Byron's been our most regular guest. And so he was an absolute for this project, wrote a score which is very tight in 5/4, and we had to immediately hit a very tight, fast 5/4 groove. So here's the opening, which has a fantastic solo from Byron, just free-spirited, jumping around the space. But also, since he'd been our most regular guest, I thought I'd ask him a question, which you'll hear at the beginning of the video. What's this club for you, Byron? Hope. So sometimes with these one-page scores, I make little additions, always on the principle really of trying to open doors. So you get this lovely compact material, and then I see if I can slip in something which creates a doorway for things to emerge from and go into quite different places. So in this case, in Byron's score, if we have another look at Byron's score, you can see that on section 4, I've frozen 2 chords from section 3. And that became a little sort of almost what you'd call in classical music a recitative moment, where you just have this fixed little chordal passage which keeps repeating, and then a flowing line on top of it. And here you hear, on this fixed passage, which I signalled, number 4, a beautiful violin solo from Jackie Shave. So Jackie there is one of the leading violinists in London, leads orchestras in London. You could say that was a classical sound. It's a bit like what we were saying with Kuljit. We're bringing all sorts of different voices and hope that they find their space. And that's an absolutely gorgeous classically high violin sound from Jackie, just over those 2 fixed chords. Then after that, we hit the groove again and drove through to the end, which you could hear on the CD. So the next piece is by Raymond MacDonald, saxophone player who's made many appearances at the club. He's in a recording session tonight and can't be with us. But I asked him for a tune. I said, Raymond, will you write us a one-page score? Include a tune. And he thought about it and then remembered that as a child, he'd always felt very moved by the films such as The Good, Bad and the Ugly and the spaghetti westerns, and he never knew why. And then he realized it was the music. And much later, he realized how much he loved Ennio Morricone's music. So his tune is a tribute to Ennio, and we all, as you hear on the CD, we all had to whistle in the end, like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. But anyway, here you hear a touch of high limb, a touch of a flutter from Raymond, then his tune, and then you'll also hear a guitar solo from Joel Bell. And I thought I'd mention that. We love Joel's solos. I'll mention it afterward. Yeah, are we going backwards? Yeah, I'll just make, before we do it, Joel's sitting there smiling at me across the room, so I've got to talk about his solo. I've spent a lot of time in the last year on 2 different CDs dealing with Joel Bell's guitar solos. And this is a classic one because it's very elegant, very absolutely stylish in this slightly 1950s band sound that we've got. But it's a beautiful shape to it. Just follow the shape of Joel's solo and notice that towards the end, he goes into sort of triplets and blue notes. And that turns all the tables and you know it's the end. And then you'll hear Rob Luff come in with the next solo. So here's a delightful tune from Raymond and a splendid solo from Joel. So there I'm giving the solo sign to Rob, who came up with another lovely solo. And we hear a special one from him in Kuljit's piece later. Kuljit, that's another lovely groove you set up there. You should have been on Radio 2 in the 1950s.
I wasn't born by then.
Oh, I was. Okay, so let's move on to the next piece. The next piece is by Chris Sharkey, and it's a text piece. We had 2 or 3 pieces that were just words, which can be a bit strange. Coming up, I think. So all sorts of different words, all sorts of different instructions, including starting on mobile phones. And then there's a lovely section, which I think of as like Stockhausen. It's all sort of pointillistic and piano-based with some fantastic piano playing of Matt Bourne. But we have fun in these pieces, and to go from a tight 5/4 rhythm into instructions about holding your mobile phone and taking selfies was all part of the spirit of the occasion. So you get a glimpse of that here with the opening of Chris Sharkey's piece. Fabulous piano playing there from Matt Bourne. I have to say, for me, that's pure Stockhausen, all that. Maybe some of you don't know Stockhausen, but that's what it used to sound like in the 60s. Fabulous playing and lovely listening. What we, I think what we were proud of in the whole 8 hours of playing is the quality of listening. So you can hear how Matt's taking the lead. Yak is in the background with colours. Simon is in the background on the blocks. And just that was a lovely little free improvisation that came from the quality of listening of those fine improvisers. I sometimes wonder about using text. I'm more someone who likes to get the actual chords or the actual notes to work with. But Helen, are you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
You've worked with all kinds of scores. How do you find working with scores that are just words?
Yeah, I sometimes work with instructional scores. I like sort of the negotiation of how you interpret that, the kind of psychology of getting into what those instructions are. The different things that they offer.
Yeah, I suppose they're more, in some ways, more open than a notated score because they are abstract in that way.
Yeah, I guess it depends how specific the textual instruction is. You can have very specific literal instructions or something more poetic. So I think it depends a lot on the detail.
Yeah, and the people doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can put any words in front of some people and it will turn into magic, and then others will just read for. Yes, we'll come to that with Pat's piece because that was just text, but somehow some magic appeared in it. Let's move on to Alice Zawodzki, which is a very traditional notation. Alice, singer, violin, performed many times at Club Inégales. In an old theatre, the score even looks like an old theatre kind of score, this handwritten, very elegiac, very lovely melody, and a poem from Alice. And you hear Alice read the poem. The band gradually go into her melody, and you also hear some lovely decorations from Halim on the top. Here we go, Alice in an Old Theatre.
They start to rise into the air. They are smiling in their reverie. It is beautiful to see. White, green flowers fall from their garments. They float down in a dream, tickling your ears as they pass, and trail a perfume to the ground at your feet.
Lovely that. And then we did that same thing I was talking about before and froze one section and settled on one of the grooves. And then later there's this amazing guitar solo from Chris Sharkey that we haven't got for you tonight, but you'll hear on the CD. So again, it was a transformational journey from that sort of theatre band playing that with the intimacy and such a wonderful communicative storyteller that Alice is. And then later it blossomed into a groove and some quite raw guitar playing, and that's always the joy for me is knowing that both are in that piece, from the local and the crafted through to something raw. What I should say is who was playing on that band. That was band number 3. So the guests were Alice and Alice Zawodzki on the violin and voice, Chris Sharkey on guitar, Mark Sanders percussion, Alfie Robinson was on percussion off screen there, and Alexander Hawkins on the piano. That we'll come to his piece and some more piano playing from him. And I'll mention the Club Inégales players a bit later too. So James Mannering came up with a really very different kind of score. Here it comes. We started in the middle and went to the extremes. The middle was a big bang and the extremes was a black hole. So we had to get from a big bang to a black hole in 25 minutes. What's really noticeable about this when I look at it is if you watch at the beginning, you can see Simon Limbrick on the vibes, just setting up a nice little cluster chord in the middle. And what he did, yeah, and you hear a nice sort of vibrating texture, which is the post-Big Bang texture. And then what Simon did is, over the next 4, 5, 6 minutes, gradually moved that cluster around, and the piece evolved. And then by the end, it was in a very different place. But the Club Inégales players are fantastic, not just at doing good riffs or nice solos, but picking things and taking them on journeys. And Simon, in this case, was the person who led our journey through these sort of harmonic areas by shifting his vibe clusters around and everyone else improvising against him. So we got from a big bang to a black hole in 20 minutes. Turned out the black hole was a 7-note scale in James's score, which you can see just around the edge of the score. So actually a black hole turned out to be a rather pleasant place, rather sounding like Ravel. Let's hope. Here we go. I love that trumpet line from Byron at the end there. Like so often in Byron's playing, da, 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 he captures the moment with both the notes, as it were, and the elegance of the melody. I've been prompted here to remind you, or to tell you for the first time, that the code, should you wish to purchase the CD by 12 o'clock tomorrow, is Unexpected50. So you can go onto the NMC website, and the address of that's in the description of this video. Go onto the NMC link, type in Unexpected50, and you get 50% off the CD by tomorrow, download or physical. It's been wonderful working with NMC, and very supportive and generous company to work with. Next one up, Rob Luft. A conventional score, you can see some nice chords, lovely melody, patterns and textures in the middle. So if I look at a score like this, it sort of the juices get going. You can just see I'll signal 3 and we'll get some rich chords. I'll single 4 and we can have some sort of overlapping arpeggio patterns. At the end it's strong and solid, and you could put a saxophone solo over that or a guitar solo over that. So this was all unrehearsed, including me. I never plan in advance what I'm going to do. So I would have looked at that just as you've looked at that now and thought, let's go there, let's go there, let's go there. In this case, we started, Rob wrote this as a melody that Hylam could play with him. So it starts with that, and then we get a glimpse of a middle section where the groove built up, and it moves towards the big chords that you get at section 4 there. And you'll just get the first glimpse of a saxophone, very wild, soulful saxophone solo from Raymond MacDonald. Here we go, Rob Luft, Op Tour. And you'll see a tribute to John Cumming in this. there's me trying to get Raven to spin those notes. So I asked all of the guests from Expect the Unexpected to just send me thoughts about John Cumming. As I said, John and I devised this project together and planning the 25 commissions and so on. And sadly, John died last year. He was a joy to work with. I worked with him also on the Third Orchestra 2 years ago. He had the lightest of touch, and yet so many things happened around him, practical and magical at the same time. As you see in that photo, we all miss him terribly. We miss him at Sirius, we miss him on the European Jazz Network. Everyone misses John, but what a pleasure to have had time with him. Yak, I know you worked for a long time with John and he supported you. Yak there?
Yes.
You worked with John?
Yes, a lot. And John was really very supportive. He was very interested in Estonian jazz, which is a remote place for London. And yeah, an important thing which he left for us was the slogan of Estonian jazz. We asked him how should we describe Estonian jazz, and he was thinking and said, "Small country, big jazz," and we still use it. We had the European Jazz Conference in Tallinn 2 weeks ago, and this was all over the place, and John was definitely there in our minds, and we were talking about him a lot, and we miss him a lot.
It feels like sometimes his spirit is still there. That's what came over from all the tributes that I had written, was he was still very alive for people. Kuljit, you have any reflections on John?
Yeah, I mean, I've my connection with John Cummings goes back to when I started working with Andy Shepherd. I think it was around 1998 or something. But just to echo your sentiments here, a lovely man, and very humble and modest man, and a real expert on the music scene, and also a real expert in how to put people together in collaborations that really worked. So yeah, we all miss him, and I've had a lot of fun with him, and I'm sure we all have, many of us have. But it's when you say his name now, and he's still alive, really, for me. But yeah, sad that he's not here in person.
Yeah, and he put you together with Andy Shepherd. He had a very open view of what music was and how it was made. I mean, when we created the Third Orchestra 2 years ago with musicians from the world, that was explicit. But way back then, he is encouraging you to be part of a bigger scene and bringing you into it.
Exactly, and I think at that time, even before then, leading up to that time, people had a particular idea of what jazz should be or what jazz is. But to bring a tabla player into that mix is a courageous thing to do, as you can imagine. But it worked, and it worked very well, and it opened the doors for many other people as well. So yeah, that's a sign of his, stepping outside the envelope and being courageous.
Yeah, lovely. And everyone remembers the glass of wine in the bar before, during, and after with him. And as we've got a lovely one of the lovely stories came from Mark Sanders about John and a pub. So let's play Mark Sanders' piece, and we have a story there from Mark about John. wonderful, wonderful memory. Everyone has their memories. In Mark's piece, I was just signalling hits, single hits, sometimes to everyone, sometimes to the piano, and then Mark and Simon Limbrick, as you can see on the score, were just doing free improvisation. They had a great energy to it, that performance. And then he asked us to play What a Wonderful World at the end, which you just caught a glimpse of then. So 17 pieces on this NMC CD, all mastered and edited by Chris Lewis, who's here. Are you here, Chris?
Hello? Yeah, I'm here.
You're on? Yeah, Chris is just a master editor and masterer. And I can say he has this uncanny sense of timing and transition. So you'll bring him something, you know, we're talking about 25-minute performances, and you want to get suddenly from minute 2 to minute 7 and just make a transition. And Chris is always there right until the middle of the night saying, no, 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 yes, 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 until it feels completely natural, that transition. It's got the wonderful ear for flow, given that we were chopping up large amounts of improvising into small boxes. And then it was 17 completely different styles. Chris, what was it like dealing with 17 completely different pieces?
Well, it's a challenge. And doing some of those transitions, probably nobody really knows what a crossfade is, but a crossfade is your best friend. And but then, yeah, it was a big challenge and successful. You said something about middle of the night, very appropriate, middle of the night.
We've spent many middle of the nights together.
Yeah, yeah.
And also sound-wise, how do you deal with the fact that you've got a funky drum kit and saxophone solo 1 minute, and then an Alice piece which is very classical sounding another? You have to find a sound for each piece, don't you?
It's all music. That's the way I look at it. It doesn't, whatever label it has, it's still music.
Yeah.
So I don't worry about whether it's classical or jazz, or I just treat it how I hear it.
Yeah, and bring out what's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, it's been such a pleasure to work with you over many years.
It's always very challenging, interesting, and enjoyable.
Yeah. We've got another CD coming out soon, but we'll talk about that later, that we finished last week.
Yeah, I can barely remember this one because of the amount of work we've just been doing on the next one.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move on to another text score, this time by Pat Thomas, which you've got on the screen there. So Pat just gave us these 7 different instructions, and they are so basic, aren't they? Bass F pedal 3/4 slow, piano G A C 5/4, strings pizzicato 7/4 starting on G. They're a little bit whimsical too, you know. But all we had was that and me going 4, 3, 2. But the band were really warm by here and playing beautifully. And I can't quite remember which section this was. I think it was bass F pedal 3/4 slow. But there's this gorgeous section that emerged and grew and grew and grew and flowered with Joel on providing 3 chords which just kept anchoring it. Ben Markland on the bass doing a slightly asymmetric bass part, but that kept shifting it and keeping it fresh. And then Torbjörn Holtmark and Byron exchanging muted trumpet solos over this gorgeous texture. And do listen to the CD. The way it evolves and bursts into energy at the end is amazing. And all this from bass F pedal 3/4 slow. Have a listen to the opening. You hear a little bit of Halim as a slow introduction, and then the groove starts and on it goes. Lovely texture there. That whistling over the top is Pat, and he created these gorgeous, and you'll hear it in Matt Bourne's piece, very simple but effective tone colours from electronics. And you saw me just giving a signal to Matt Bourne there, and he lifted us forward by a whole sequence of piano chords which took us to the next section. Lovely spirit around that playing. And we were talking to Helen earlier about, you know, if you've only got text, what happens? But Pat was in the room, and I think the presence of the composer and the feeling that they give, and I'm sure that is a Pat Thomas kind of feeling. I think the feeling that the composer gives in their presence is as important as what's on the page, or you know, whether that's notes or words or whatever. And the wonderful thing about this project was that of the 22 composers, 20 played with us over those 8 hours, and we had their presence. So Alexander Hawkins' piece, really interesting score this. It's everyone goes through roughly at the same time, but they all find their own way through the labyrinth, and so you get this lovely evolving lattice work, each player finding their own path through. And lovely flowing textures resulted over, as I keep saying, over 20-25 minutes. But here we see an encapsulated version. There's a story here about a very famous and controversial goal scored for Brazil by Garrincha. And you'll hear Alice tell us the beginning and the end of the story.
It was in Italy in 1958. Brazil's national team was playing Club Fiorentina on the way to the World Cup in Sweden. Garrincha invaded the penalty area, left one defender sitting on his bottom, shook off another, and then one more. Garrincha put the ball between the keeper's legs and flew into the net along with it. Afterward, with the ball under his arm, he slowly returned to the field. He walked with his gaze lowered, Chaplin in slow motion, as if asking forgiveness for the goal that had all Florence on its feet.
I could listen to Alice telling stories all day, and gorgeous violin and trumpet there with those weaving textures. Ear again, ear. The way they're reading what's on the page, but they're improvising the lines crisscrossing with one another. So Matt Bourne's piece next, called 40. This is it. So this wins the prize for the shortest one-page score. Very nice chord. That Matt's idea was that, well, it was for someone who was 40, so you struck it 40 times. We struck it 25 times for the London Jazz Festival. And what fascinates me about this is, two things I think fascinate me. One is the orchestration, which was spontaneous. I love spontaneous orchestrations. So people saw that, picked a note, and the trumpet knew how to, you know, think, I'll voice it there. The violin thought, I'll voice it there. The guitar thought, I'll voice it there. And by choosing an authentic voicing for their instrument, it makes the whole thing come alive as a chord. So I love the orchestration of this. And actually, across that, you hear Pat Thomas doing these lovely sort of scrapey electronic sounds, which just is just the spice that sound needs. So this is a couple of those 25 chords, and then a point at which Matt broke out in a very powerful piano solo. And a lovely tribute to John again. John made time. I somehow know what Matt means by saying that. He opened the space, he changed time, he changed what was possible in the most gentle way. But what a lovely quote. John made time. Next score is a graphic score. Kim Macari. There you see it. You either have black or you have white. Called Arundel. It's two starting points. A quote by Nicholas Abrams about World War II. What hurts is not the dead, but the gaps left within us by the secrets of others. And she talked about, on a personal level, her experiences of PTSD and gaps in her memory that her brain tried to fix. So this is, in a way, a simple, straightforward score, but with a lot of meaning behind it for Kim, which I think people picked up. And she said to the players, you choose what the gaps are, the black or the white. And each player took, therefore, their own pathway through it. Sometimes it's really interesting if players start off and follow their own path, and if that's authentic, it tends to go really well with other people's paths. Here's a lovely section with a grungy bass, a tabla groove, and then a great burst of piano that comes from Martin. That was my video interpretation of her score there, and the shifts in the brain that it does. Look, powerful playing from Martin there. And that kind of playing, the great thing about it is it's kind of gift when I'm conducting and giving signals, because it becomes a transition. You can just see he lifts us into another space, and then we could flip into another space. And we're always sort of looking for waves in the improvisation, because when you reach the peak of a wave, you have the chance to flip to somewhere else, whereas if you're halfway up a wave, it's all a bit of a muddle. So there's a lovely example of someone really going for something which led to other things that other people could really go for. Alfie Robinson directed his own piece, and it was based on photos. I think we've got a picture of that. He gave everyone these pictures, and then he directed people in and out. So a very open piece, but then there was this wonderful surprise, very free, and it went into jazz at one point, it went into kind of pointillistic textures at one point, trilly textures at one point, and you hear at the end a nice strong texture, again with Matt Bourne's piano playing, and then Chris Sharkey loses it. I love the way the band just wander off at the end. Chris Sharkey is a great person to improvise with, because there's that free spirit that could go anywhere at any time. We're going to move on to Yak. Yak's piece. Yak won the second prize for the longest one-page score. Heavy. Dum da 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 dum dum. That's all we got on a photo from Estonia. But that lift at the end says everything, really, because that propels it forward and it can go on for a very long time. Although, again, I thought maybe I should add something to create a B, to create a breakout session. So then I did this score, and at figure 2, I took his 5th and then made it go down and down and down and down and down and down until it sort of crashed to the bottom. So it gave us this get out clause in the piece, and we could drive and drive at Yak's rhythm, but also crash out and then restart. For good or ill, that's the kind of thing that I think I can sometimes add to one-page scores. Let's see what Yak thinks, but let's have a listen to the performance. It features you have to hear it all, of course, but you'll hear the bones of an amazing saxophone solo by James Mannering and a great sort of noise solo from Yak himself. Give us 3 words for the open and an intro from Yak.
No. Like quiet propaganda.
Quiet propaganda. Oh, right. Yeah. I love that sax solo from James. I think that's how all saxophone solos should end, with the player honking on one note and all the rest of the band giving up. He's just got an amazing energy, James, when he plays. You just love to trace his solos, and great texture from Yak there on that noise solo. Yak, how does it sound 4 years later? You'd forgotten it, I think.
Yes, I have forgotten it. And I think this one riff was enough for the band, because those musicians are so good, and they did exactly what had to be done. And actually, I learned the lesson when I was a teenager still. Joe Savinul was playing here in Tallinn, and he had a press conference, and somebody asked him, where does he get inspiration? Or how does he get inspired? And then he said that, well, I can write a symphony from the sound of a coin falling on the floor. And I thought this is kind of interesting idea, but I think it's actually true. You just need a starting point, and when you go, and those musicians were so great, they just needed a very tiny starting point, and that was it.
Yeah. I always remember Leon Noble, the jazz pianist, saying, I just write enough to get the guys going. That's always a lodestone for me. Just write, you can write a whole Beethoven symphony, but you can also write just enough to get the guys going. And you got the guys going there. So Martin has been sitting patiently there. Martin has been the associate director of the band and pianist for since whenever we started, 2008, and then the club started in 2011. Martin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. What's it been like the last 15 years?
Well, I think it's a bit longer than that. It's 2005 or something we started.
Right.
So it's just been like living in a parallel bit of my life the whole time. Learning the Inégales way, working with so many different musicians, and not just musicians at the club, of course. We've had visual artists, poets, writers, all sorts, and it's now a part of the way I think about my musical life. I mean, I think something that Yap said just now is absolutely key to all this, which is the musicians we've had in the club and on this CD in particular are so good and are so used to listening to different styles and interacting with different styles and finding a way to offset what they're hearing by adapting what they're doing. You can write, as he said, just a small fragment, and they'll take off and they'll use it to create really, really unexpected things. And that's what I've learned from the whole experiences. One can do that, whatever the material, whatever the style, whatever the stylistic assumptions and expectations. It can go anywhere at all. But the more experienced and the more inventive the musicians we work with are, the greater the flexibility. I mean, it's not just improvisation; it's discipline and concentration that makes it work. So it's been extraordinary, the whole thing.
That's great. Martin and I have just worked so closely on the editing, on the playing, but also on the scheming, on the strategy of the club, and it's just been such a joy to work together for so long. And of course, he's an exquisite piano player. There were times in the early sessions when we had a week with just the initial band playing together. Every now and then we'd all just stop and listen to Martin. It was a joy to listen to Martin just taking us on journeys through these harmonies, which actually you'll hear in the next CD even more strongly. But it's been such a pleasure to work with Martin, and a pleasure to work with the band. Some of the people are more recent. Halim's been in it maybe for 3 years, but Simon Limbrick, Ben Markland, Joel Bell have been there from the start, and fantastic playing, as you can hear, as the way they adjust from Byron's 5/4 to Halim's tech score and so on. So a fantastic musicianship, and also fantastic sort of technique in terms of understanding how to bring things out from people. Simon has a way of whispering on the vibraphone that just enhances what people do, and Ben has an extraordinary way of fixing a bass line and then just moving it at the right moment. So suddenly everybody's transported, and then he moves it again, and then he goes back. So while we're all flatlining, Ben is making us move around. I mentioned Joel's guitar solos. Max Bailey's been a fantastic member of the band for some time. John Banks on accordion. But it's been, what we have at the club, I think, which is what I love, is that we don't, Simon once said to me, thank God the jazz police aren't here. And it was also, thank God the new music police aren't here, or the free improvisation police, or the early music police. I try and have a situation where there are no police, because we don't go for a specific style. We go for what people hear. So you might have a pizzicato funk viola as much as a funk drummer, and to get people, and so we listen fresh to the rhythm, harmony, melodies of what's there, rather than according to any stylistic practice. But the band has been incredible for 10 years, accompanying 100 different guests, from a comedian to a Maori shaman to Will Self to straight up jazz players or straight up classical players. It's been a complete joy and wonderful to go on that journey. I've written something about the evolution of the club and the philosophy, the Inégales philosophy, which you can see on the NMC website. Joel, have we got that? That's in the, there's NMC. In the description of this YouTube video, you'll see the link, and you can read more about how we created the club. Martin and I, and with Andrew Ward also as the other associate director. And the three of us, in sometimes very short meetings, have sculpted the whole evolution of the club over 11 years, including the sister organisation, the Institute of Composing, Academy Inégales, and so on. It's been a composite project over 10 years. So we're reaching the last piece, which is Kuljit's piece. There's Kuljit's score. What did you have in mind, Kuljit, when you wrote this?
Nothing profound, really, to be honest, except that I wanted to do a tabla rhythm that wasn't traditional. So I played a simple 3-8-2-4, 3-8-3-4 type pattern, which sort of can also be disguised as a simple 4-beat cycle. So I took that, and then I also, one thing I've been exploring since the days of playing with Andy Shepherd is having more than one tuned tabla. Normally the tabla is a 2-piece set, a low one and a high one, and the high one's tuned meticulously to the sort of tonic or the key of the song. It very soon dawned upon me when playing with Andy that, you know, all the songs were in different keys. I didn't have time to get my hammer out and tune between tracks. So I took this really simple 4-note melody that I could play on the tabla, and sort of had a feeling that the band would take it in its own direction and give it a new life.
Yeah, and the fact that it's just a 3 or 4 note tune and turns on itself creates a sort of crucible that everybody else can turn on. It. Everything is about turning around. You're not pushing out too far. You're just keeping that organism
alive,
ticked on for 20 minutes and arrived at incredible places out of that nucleus. It's the real nucleus. Actually, this is the last piece, and we're going to play it. But I just wondered if Helen and Helium are still there. Kuljit, are there any questions you want to ask or anything you want to say generally? You can ask me a question, or you can give a view of the whole thing.
I think, if I can just say very quickly, I think it's the platform and the arena that you and your team have created. It shifts in a very good way, I think, what people think music can be or music is, and also the idea of a composer sitting down writing reams of like score very precisely and very prescriptive, you know, for musicians. That's just one option of how to create music. You could hand a very simple, very small cell of an idea to a good team of musicians, and they will create music. So I for me personally, I thought it was great. You know, this idea of having a composer separate to the musicians somehow got challenged in a good way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, composers 200 years ago were all performers, sometimes better known as Beethoven, Mozart. They improvise, and the separation of performer and composer last century was a shame in many ways. And of course, we had 20 of the 22 composers playing with us. So as I was saying before, influencing the whole feel of the room.
I mean, in a way, also. Sorry, just to add to that, also, Peter, that like if you take Indian classical music recitals, obviously people like Ravi Shankar and people who followed him were also the composers of their piece. It's just the difference in the Western world is people wrote something down that other people could then reproduce, and that has its blessings and its curses at the same time.
Great. Hey, Lemma, you any thoughts about playing with us for 4 or 5 years?
Actually, Kuljit brought up the question that I wanted to ask, but now I came up with new question maybe. I think as a musicians and composers, we sort of know how it works, but to the audience, it might be quite puzzling. It's quite confusing how it works. Because as you said, stylistically, it can't be definable. So how do you approach the audience? How do you justify what we are doing?
I think I justify it by the journey, the fact that I think when the audience are with us, as they have been on many nights, they follow the journey. I think that's my job as well as all the players, that we may start in one place and arrive in another. And if you're making a package of a music, that can be a problem. But if you're live with it, I think if we get the timing right, you see it suddenly go free or suddenly pick up something it did before, or as at the end of Kuljit's piece, open into a whole new landscape. I think that our task, of course it can be difficult compared to a more packaged kind of music, but the joy of it is when people pick the journey and they're in the room with us, they see me signal to Max. Max changes his notes by a semitone, the whole band shifts. At least the audience can see my signals and they can see that Max was leading the story. So I think it can be. We don't always have good nights, but on good nights, there's a narrative to the music, and the audience come with us, and the audience know that that narrative belongs to them, because those pieces will never be the same on another night, and you know they wouldn't be the same half an hour later. So, but that's the challenge of the club, but that's the joy when it works. I think for me. Good question. Helen, Helen has played at the club. And any last thought from Helen?
I just wanted to say, really, if you think all the different sorts of scores that we've seen, different ways that composers have communicated through their scores, it just shows how kind of flexible the band is, really, and how easily they shift from one type of score to another. It's an amazing testament to how flexible and open the band is. So I really had a great time coming to play with you and being a part of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was great playing with you. It's a shame you're not on this, but you must come again on the sax.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we'll thank you. We'll go to the last piece, and it's Kuljit's piece, and you'll hear his tabla tune at the beginning. And in this case, I've encapsulated the shape of the whole, a little reflecting what Hailem said. So you'll hear the opening, then you'll hear when the groove picked up, then you'll hear it transform into more sort of minimalist textures. And then there's a fantastic guitar solo from Rob Luft, one of the highlights of the evenings. Not least because you hear the band move around him and Ben moved the bass line. And it's this wonderful moment when Rob rises to the top, Ben shifts the bass, and Rob comes down again. And it's the twist that turns us into the whole of the rest of the piece. And then the rest of the piece played out very slowly over about 8 minutes and actually became rather sad and melancholy and settled on a very gentle and rather melancholy texture, which was the end of that evening. But it was it's also the end of the CD, and it was a very special place to arrive, all out of that sort of kernel and nucleus that Kuljit had set up. So here's a slightly longer example, 3-minute example of Kuljit's tabla tune. That's a beautiful end, and we treasure that end and the listening and concentration that that band put into arriving there. So let's thank everybody. Let's remind you of all the players. We had Alice Sawadsky, voice and violin, Byron Wallen and Kim Makari, trumpets, Raymond MacDonald, James Mannering, saxes, Rob Luff, Yak Soar, Chris Sharkey, guitars, Matt Bourne, Alexander Hawkins, piano, Pat Thomas, electronics, Mark Sanders, Alfie Robinson, percussion, and Koljit Bamra, tabla, all playing there, plus scores from Alec Roth and Helen Papagnanu. And the club band that appeared over the 2 days, Halim Kim, Tagum, flute, Jackie Shave, violin, Torbjörn Hortmark, trumpet, Christian Forshaw, saxophone, John Banks, accordion, Joel Bell, guitar, Ben Markland, bass, Simon Limbrick, drums and percussion, and Martin Butler, piano. So thank you all for watching tonight. I should also thank John Cumming for the wonderful inspiration again of setting this project going. All the people at Sirius who've supported us in 2017 and in this project, Pelin, Rob, Beth, and the EFG London Jazz Festival. Joel Bell for managing the live stream. Christoph Tressler for splendid camera work, for the support that we've had from Arts Council, England, Brunel University, NMC, who've been fantastically supporting. And as I said at the beginning, Hodge, Jones and Allen, who have hosted us at Euston for 10 years in the most generous way. It began when we did a charity gig and the boss, Patrick, said to me, this could be your home. And it's been our home for 10 years. And it's a gift, an unbelievable gift, Patrick. Thank you for that. The club, because it's such an intimate basement, we can't quite open yet, but we will open as soon as possible and bring that vibe back, because there's a great vibe down there. The CD is available. I think you can go onto the description and find the link. The code is unexpected50 if you buy it before 12 o'clock tomorrow, or it will be unexpected25 if you buy it in the next week. As Chris and I were saying, there's another Club Inégales NMC CD coming out in time for the London Jazz Festival, which is a tribute, homage to Miles Davis, but we'll come to that later. If you want to be in touch with us, info@clubinegales.com, and always pleased to hear from you. And I guess I should end by thanking our audience, because some people over those 10 years came time after time and helped build the atmosphere, the combination of the formal and the relaxed, the fact that we have a communication, we have a conversation with them, and then they listen like a pin drop. So the listening has been incredible, and that listening has really helped us play over 10 years. So thank you also to our audience, and we look forward to seeing you again. Keep in touch with us. Thanks to everyone, and we'll just play out with another little bit of that touching sound of Pat Thompson. Thanks a lot for joining us this evening, and thanks, of course, to Helen, Yak, Martin, and Halim and Chris for joining us for the conversations. Koljit, really nice to have you with us, and again, we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.